You're a monk on a small island off the coast of England, and it's June 8th, 793. No weapons here, no warning, just prayer books and salt air until the ships show up. By the end of that day, monks are dead, some drowned in the sea in front of their own altar, others dragged away in chains to be sold. And one of the men who survived to write about it said it felt like the world itself was ending. Historians point to this exact morning as the start of the Viking Age, and it's usually where the Vikings were brutal story stops. But this is just one of 5 moments where the Vikings did something so dark it's genuinely hard to sit with. And the version everyone already knows is not even the worst one on the list. There's a story ranked above it that's so brutal, modern doctors had to run an actual anatomical study just to check if it was physically possible for a human body to survive it. This started almost 350 years before the Vikings even had a name. Around 450 AD, on a tiny Swedish island called Öland, an entire fortified village was wiped out overnight. Not raided, erased. Archaeologists found the bodies 1,500 years later, still lying exactly where they fell. Women, children, an entire community gone in one night. And the strangest detail isn't the killing, it's that the attackers left the gold behind. Jewelry sitting right next to the corpses, untouched. Whoever did this wasn't there to steal. They were there to send a message, and then they just walked away and let the island rot. That's not officially Viking. Historians won't even call it that. But it's the exact culture that became the Vikings. 3 centuries before Lindisfarne is what archaeologists found in the houses. Half-eaten meals still on the floor. A goat still tethered by the door that had starved to death because nobody survived to feed it. Whatever happened on Öland that night wasn't a battle. There was no fight back. It was closer to an execution of an entire town. And to this day, nobody can fully agree on who gave the order or why they never came back to claim the land. Now fast forward. Every 9 years, in what's now Sweden, thousands of people gathered for something called the Great Blót at Uppsala. 9 days of ritual, 9 male animals sacrificed each day. And buried in the old accounts, almost as a footnote, is the detail that gets cut from every casual retelling. Multiple historical sources claim humans were part of that count too. The bodies, animal and human together, were hung afterward in a sacred grove right beside the temple. Not hidden, not shameful. A place people walked past on purpose every 9 years, like clockwork, because to them, it wasn't horror, it was holy. A German chronicler named Adam of Bremen wrote about the grove decades later, and even he, a man used to writing about war, described it as something he could barely bring himself to detail. To the Norse, this wasn't cruelty, it was maintenance, a transaction with the gods that kept the crops growing and the harbors safe. And if that meant a body swinging next to a bowls, that was simply the price. Here's where it gets political instead of religious. Jump to November 13th, 1002, England. King Athelred, nicknamed the Unready for a reason, is sick of Viking raids, so he does something drastic. He orders the killing of every Danish settler living in England. Not soldiers, not raiders, families who had already settled down and built ordinary lives there. It backfires almost instantly. One of the dead is believed to be the sister of Sweyn Forkbeard, King of Denmark. Sweyn doesn't just get angry, he invades, again and again. And within a little over a decade, his own son Canute ends up ruling England outright. A massacre designed to end Viking violence in England somehow guarantees an actual Viking conquest of it. Athelred didn't stop the story. He wrote the next chapter of it himself. Some accounts even claim the killings in Oxford were so frantic that terrified Danish families barricaded themselves inside a church for safety, and the mob burned it down around them rather than let anyone walk out alive. A king trying to erase an entire population from his kingdom ended up handing his own throne to their king's son within a generation. Then Lindisfarne happens, the one you already know, the monastery, the monks. The moment Europe realizes something new and terrifying has arrived on its coastline. For centuries, this raid was treated as the ceiling of Viking brutality, the worst thing they were capable of. It's not even close to the worst thing. The story sitting at the top of this list is one you've probably heard whispered about if you know anything about the Vikings at all. And for a long time, historians assumed it wasn't real, just terrifying propaganda dressed up as history. It's called the Blood Eagle, and the most famous version of the legend belongs to to the sons of Ragnar Lodbrok, avenging their father's death on the English king they blamed for killing him. Here's what the sagas claim actually happened. The victim held face down, their ribs cut away from the spine, one at a time. Then their lungs pulled out through the wound in their back and spread out to look like a pair of wings. And according to the old accounts, the victim was still alive through most of it. For centuries, historians filed this under myth. Too extreme, too theatrical, surely just poetic exaggeration, meant to make Viking revenge sound as terrifying as possible. But a few years ago, a team of doctors, anatomists, and historians actually sat down and tested that assumption properly. Not with legend, with real anatomy. They asked one blunt question. Using the tools and knowledge available in the Viking Age, could this physically be done to a human body? The answer came back yes. Not easy, but possible. They even pinpointed a specific type of Viking spearhead, sharp and precise enough to cut through a rib cage, fast enough for the ritual described in the sagas. And there's a carved stone in Sweden that some researchers now believe might be depicting the exact moment it happened, frozen in rock for over 1,000 years. What makes this one different from the other four isn't the violence, it's the intent behind it. Sandby Borg was a massacre. Uppsala was religion. St. Brice's day was panic. But the Blood Eagle, if it happened at all, wasn't rage. It was engineering. A punishment built with anatomical precision, designed to be witnessed, designed to become a story that outlived everyone in the room, which might be exactly why it survived 1,000 years, while so many other Viking atrocities got lost to time. It was built to be remembered. So we're left with something genuinely uncomfortable. Not proof that it happened exactly the way the sagas describe, but proof that it wasn't just a story, that the most horrifying legend in all of Viking history isn't actually impossible. An island wiped out and left untouched. A god demanding human beings hung next to sacrificed animals. A king who tried to erase the Vikings and accidentally handed them a crown. A monastery that changed how Europe saw the sea. And a method of revenge so specific that scientists had to double-check whether the human body could even survive it long enough for it to work. 5 different moments, 500 years apart, and the same question sitting underneath every single one of them. How much of what we call history only survived because someone, somewhere, decided it was worth writing down before it disappeared completely?